Being a Christian is like being a drunk person trying to climb on top of a horse. That's what one of my professors told my class when I was a fellow in 2007, 2008. My cohort over there knows what I'm talking about. I admit it's a bit crass and unusual, but it's an image that has really stuck with me over the years. I mean, picture someone clumsily climbing up from one side, achieving a moment of stability, only to tumble off onto the other side, and then stubbornly getting back up and attempting the same feat over and over and over. I think this has stuck with me because it has been so true of my Christian life. I often find myself teetering back and forth between grace and legalism, or pride and humility, or serving and being served. And so when we were asked to think about tension that we have experienced since the Fellows Program, this thought immediately popped into my head. Because I think this image also relates to my struggle and my tension with finding vocation and calling in my life. Because see, on the one side of the horse, there's this high, visionary, beautiful depiction of vocation and work. It's theologically rich, and it's full of passion and excitement. And the Fellows Program did an amazing job of introducing this side to me. I had never heard it before I did the Fellows Program, and it gave me a theological foundation and language for understanding calling in a new way and having a sense of how to explore that for what it meant for me. And I hope you all have had a similar experience. You've spent almost 9 months now being immersed in teachings and discussions and conferences like this, discussing all of these things. And it's wonderful, and it's true. But there is another side of the horse, if you will, and it's not necessarily bad, but it's definitely different. And if you're not prepared for it in another month or so when you leave the Fellows Program, it can be a little jarring, and if you're not careful, a little jading. And it's this side where you practice and learn the reality of what it means to get a job and to keep a job. It can be filled with confusion and frustration and boredom. It's about routine, completing tasks and projects, having responsibility, and the day in and day out monotony that's almost impossible to learn when you're a fellow and every day and every week is filled with new and exciting things. So my first job after the Fellows Program, I think, is a great example of this. I had spent the end of college and my time as a fellow discerning that my calling had something to do with caring for people, especially people that I felt like were generally uncared for by society, and working to bring hope and redemption into areas of injustice. So when I landed a job as a research assistant for a nonprofit that was doing just this work, I was elated. It's that exciting side of the horse, right? And I was there. And if you look at my resume for the 2 years I spent in that job, it might seem like a dream job. But a resume, or the collection of bios you have in front of you this weekend, can't fully capture the experience of being in a position for a long time, which at that point in my life, 2 years in one position was a long time. What my resume doesn't list are the less exciting and glamorous moments. Moments of answering phones and taking messages, of dropping book orders off at the post office, of keeping track of the receipts, which I am awful at, by the way, and should never be allowed to do again, and even driving across town to pick up special cat food for my boss's 2 cats. Even when I was doing work I cared about, when I was doing research, I loved what I was finding out and learning. But if you or anyone who has done research for an extended amount of time, you know that it can be very boring and laborious. It's not always exciting. And when I was in that position, I think on days like that, I thought, I just must have a boring job. I need to find something else. But the more jobs and internships I've had, the more I've realized this is sort of just part of being the experience of having a job. There are people who will say, find a job you love, and you'll never work a day in your life. It is a beautiful statement. And I hope you find one like that. I still hope I find one like that. But I've had multiple jobs and experiences that I have loved and that I am eternally grateful for, but they have always felt like work. And I think what I've realized is the Fellows Program teaches you just about all you need to know for the rest of your life. You learn more in the Fellows Program than maybe the entire 17 years of school you've had before that. But the challenge is spending the rest of your life figuring out how to live into that and be faithful in that. That's been the challenge for me. And this was easier for me in some ways when I first finished the program. I spent the next 2 years in Charlottesville where I had been, and I still had amazing community. I was in Bible study with the girls that had meant so much to me and eventually were in my wedding, and I was still part of the community of like-minded people. But in the last 4 years, I've moved 3 times. I don't recommend that, but sometimes it's where God leads you. And each time it meant starting over, finding a new community, finding a new church, finding a new job. And I think that's quite characteristic of a lot of the people in our generation. If I can still include myself in your generation, please let me. And it can be really tough and really lonely. I was thankful for the girl last night who asked the question about what do you do in those moments, because I have lived them and they're hard. And if that's where you find yourself next year or the year after that, know that you're not alone. And remember that even though it's long and hard, God is faithful. I haven't figured out the answer to these loneliness or hard times, but one thing that I have done in terms of vocation has been to really seek opportunities even in the hard times, that would continue to lead me down this path of what I felt like was my calling, even when it's a riskier decision. So the job that I already told you about was a part-time position to start out with. No benefits, no insurance, no paid time off. And I took it over a full-time position that had all of those things, but had nothing to do with my interests or my strengths or my calling. It's a riskier thing. But I made it work by doing things like living with my host family a second year and even coaching a middle school boys basketball team, which, Hunter, I don't know where you are tonight, but I really could have used your help that year. Where am I here? Okay. So those aren't always the easier decisions or the safer decisions, but when I look back, they have been the more valuable decisions that I've made in my life. And sometimes this was the only thread that I could find. My husband and I recently moved back to Richmond, Virginia, and I hope and pray that that is the last move we'll ever make in our lives. And I recently started a new job as the program director for an agency called the Grey Haven. As Kate said, we work with survivors of human trafficking. And this is sort of a dream job for me, and the way that God sort of orchestrated it was really incredible for me to be in this position. But you know what? It hasn't taken long to find myself on the other side of the horse. And even though that can be frustrating or monotonous, it's less scary to me than it used to be, because I'm seeing how valuable and essential this side is as well. Because passion is nice, and a theological framework is important, but it's on this other side of the horse that work actually gets done, and that I actually gain experience. As I've been planning this talk, I came across this quote by Gary Haugen, who many of you probably know of. He started the International Justice Mission and was a gateway for me into understanding God's heart for justice. And he said something that I think fits and actually sums this up in a more eloquent way than I could. He said, "What victims need are not our spasms of passion, but our long obedience in the same direction." So in the months and years to come, I invite you to join me in continuing to climb up on that horse. You may fall off many times on one side or the other, but keep climbing, and we'll slowly develop the ability to live in the tension and to ride with one foot on each side. Thank you.